In this video, David Richardson with NCI is going to be talking about how to set up a scope of work for a duct renovation project. Something you need to know how to do because a lot of times duct systems need to be upgraded. So David goes step by step how to do that. David is with NCI. NCI is one of the best training organizations out there. Please go check those guys out. They're doing great work. Big thanks to everybody who supported the 2023 symposium, which is where this class comes from. Hvac, ACA being our title sponsors, and everybody else who sponsored and spoke made it a great event. We're doing it again in 2024, early 2024. To find out more, get your tickets, either virtual or in person. Go to hvacrschool.com, go up to the top events, find the event, and then get your tickets because they are going to sell out really, really fast. Here we go, David Richardson talking about how to set up an ironclad scope of work for a duct renovation project.
Now, one of the things I want to start this off with, and I'm going to do my best not to get emotional as I talk about this. Some of you may know my background, others may not. So for those of you that have heard this story before, I ask you to bear with me because I feel that it sets the stage for what we're going to talk about here. This photo was taken in 2012. I actually had brown hair back then. I may have been about the same weight, I can't remember. But you'll notice there's a fellow in the blue shirt beside me there. That is Rob Falke. Rob is the daddy of residential air balancing. It didn't exist before he started doing it and brought it from the commercial world into residential. 12 years before this photo, I was on my way out of the HVAC industry. I saw this industry as a black hole. I saw it as a road to nowhere. I was tired and sick of getting undersold on jobs when we knew that our company did better work. It was about this time, I had 1 foot out, guys, that I met Rob. I met him at the Energy Management Conference in Louisville, Kentucky, back in January of 2000. And Rob introduced me to airflow testing, diagnostics, and what we're going to talk about today, which is the result of that testing, duct system renovation. As I said, I was on my way out, guys. What duct renovation, what airflow testing did, it made work fun again. Instead of going out and having to deal with all the hassles and trying to use some type of selling technique that somebody had taught us, we went from high pressure sales to static pressure sales. We started taking the measurements that we were finding, presented them to the customer in an easy way that they could understand, and then let them make the decision. And guys, these are some of the steps that we're going to get into as we start to talk about renovations. I think it's important that you understand this. Guys, duct renovation is what kept me in the business. I would not be in this industry right now if it were not for this specialized product that every single one of you can create. However, there are steps to it. So I want to make sure that we focus on this and that you guys understand, it is what kept me in the industry. Rob changed my life that day. And I'm hoping that what I present to you guys today may do the same. Some of you may feel the same way. You've got all these stuff going on. Our industry isn't changing more now than it ever has. There's a lot of opportunity in that if you embrace it. So let's get started. As I mentioned, Rob made this a game, a puzzle, if you will. There are puzzle pieces. And of course, they all fit all nicely together. Wouldn't it be great if every job worked like that? You'll notice that this is broken into 4 very broad categories. We've got design, we've got installation, verification, and communication. Now, within these 4 big puzzle pieces, there's also multiple little puzzle pieces. Let's take design, for instance. If you guys had to name some of the small puzzle pieces in design, what would you insert there? Grills? I'm hearing somebody. I'm sorry, I'm wearing glasses, and if I don't do this, I can't see you. Grills? Boxes? Collars? So we're thinking about the duct system. Ed is going to talk about manual D a little bit later on. How to make sure that we've got that foundation, the target that we're aiming for. We also get into the heat loss, heat gain calculations, equipment selection, equipment specifications. These are all part of our design. Installation is what you guys bring. How many of you have ever been sick and tired of getting undersold? I said that earlier, but I want to ask you. I was sick of it. How many of you are sick and tired of it? Do you want a better way to market yourselves, to prove the craftsmanship that you guys bring to the market? If the answer is yes, then this is what you need. Because your installation is what makes the equipment work. I don't know if you guys have ever thought about that. You bring the HVAC system to life through your installation. The HVAC equipment is nothing more than a component in the systems that every single one of you build. You bring it life. Now there's a flip side to that. If you do the install wrong, you also kill it prematurely. Double-edged sword. That installation, that's on you guys. The verification is also on you guys. You can verify that your work does what you said it was going to do, what you intended, what you promised, and verify it and prove it. Now, there's a scary part about that. Some of you may have sat in my session with Chris Hughes yesterday, and we talked about how data makes things transparent. The principles of our industry that are hidden from view, measurement brings them out, and we have two choices. We either address them or we run from them. It's your choice. And then finally, we have the communication side. When it comes to duct renovation, if I was going to rank one as an order of priority, communication is probably going to come tops, because nothing happens until you sell something. It's a quote by Red Motley. Nothing happens until you sell something. And guys, we do a fantastic job of overcomplicating what we do. And sometimes it's valid, right? What we do is essentially rocket science. But we have to boil it down to a level that a customer can understand. Most of our industry doesn't do airflow. So we're going to boil this down to a level that a customer can understand. Some of you may agree with this approach, some of you may not. If you don't agree with it, I would encourage you to try it and see what happens. You may even improve it. All I'm doing here is making suggestions that you guys can look at. And you can quote me on this one. Poorly installed HVAC systems, they're puzzles waiting for you guys to solve them. It makes our job fun again. Because now all this stuff, you guys know what we used to call neighborhoods that were 5 years old? Inventory. That's what 5-year-old neighborhoods were. If they were older than that, assured inventory. If we could get in that neighborhood, it was game on. And you guys will be the same way. So if you're sick and tired of the grind and you want to make your work fun again, guys, this is the way to do it. Let's preview what we're going to talk about. First, we're going to talk about what duct renovation is. I'm really interested in your all's feedback on this, because everybody in this room will probably define it just a little bit differently. So I want to hear what your take is on it. And then we'll get down to the essence of it, what it really is, what we can distill from it. From that, we're going to talk about the importance of duct renovation, why it's important. We're going to start off with that. Some of the stuff you guys may have seen in the presentation I did with Chris yesterday. And then we're going to talk about 5 rules. And you may come up with other ones. We're also going to talk about 5 questions to consider for any duct renovation. And then finally, we're going to break it down to 7 steps. And you'll notice that some of these steps, they may move. That's the challenge with duct renovation. There is no one-size-fits-all, no flow chart you can follow from start to finish, because a lot of times it depends. And this is where you have to adapt on the fly. You have to improvise based on what your measurements are. And then finally, we'll do a review and give you guys some next steps. So, if you had to define duct renovation is blank. How would you guys define it? Did I hear fun? You get a hat. You paid attention. Duct renovation is fun. That's what it does. What else? Work. Work and dirty. Profitable. Let me go to work and dirty real quick, because it is work and dirty, and that's why most people don't pay attention to it. The young man who's running the show back here, we talked about it earlier. You guys have all got rafter knees. You've got insulation been stuck up your nose and in your teeth. You know what it's like. It is not easy work. But to the gentleman who said it on the other side of the room, it is profitable. Camera guy, I apologize, because I am like a frenetic kid. I'm all over the place, man. Duct renovation is work. That's why most people won't do it, is because it's hard. It's not easy. It's not a silver bullet. It takes effort. And you're going to find out, if you don't have your why in place, if you don't understand why you're doing it, you'll give up. I know there were times when we first started doing this, I almost gave up, because I was like, I would throw my hands up. And then I'd call Rob Falke, or I'd call Dominic Guarino, the CEO of NCI, who's sitting on the front row. If you guys don't know Dominic, you need to get to meet him. Dominic's a visionary. And I can tell you guys that when I was getting into this, Dominic's phone was available. What's interesting, it was available more then than it is now that I work for him. So duct renovation, you guys, you've defined some principles that describe the essence of it. That's what's important. Duct renovation is a product that you bring into existence. It does not exist until you discover it and until you make it available to the customer. It moves beyond swapping boxes out and gets into the true HVAC system. Another way to understand this is to look at the root word of renovation. The Latin for renovate is novare, and what that means is to make new. So we're making the system new when we renovate it. Now, I'm going to confess to you guys, this is how we used to do most duct renovations. We went straight to repairing. Can you guys relate with that? You ever done it? Oh, this is bad. Rip it all out and start throwing new ducts in. Guess what we did? We put in a new screwed up duct system. Great. It's because we missed some steps. And you guys may want to take note of this. The first step in this is testing. How many of you sat in the presentation I did last year on 5 airflow diagnostics? Anybody sit on that? Okay. This ties in with that perfectly. Grateful that Brian invited me back, because those 5 airflow tests, for many of you, that's what's going to generate the lead for this profitable work. It is having your technicians testing. So we're going to go back on some of those things and tie them back into how this ties in. So we skip the testing part. And many test, but they don't diagnose. And when we started doing this, we had to do the diagnostics with this. There are tools that automate this for you now. How cool is it that you can hook up wireless test instruments, sync them to an app like MeasureQuick, and it tells you what's going on? What an age for our industry. Guys, these are tools. That's why I say this is the best time ever to get into this, instead of having to do it the old school way. We diagnose. From that diagnosis, we start to prescribe repairs. And remember what I said. Duct renovation is brought to life by you. You give it existence. So if you don't test, diagnose, and prescribe the repairs, if you're in a hurry to get in and out, you're not going to take advantage of this. This is a differentiator. This is what will separate you. Don't jump straight to repairs. You guys may have heard the term, if you don't measure, you're just guessing. Well, when we jump straight to repairs, we are guessing. We need live test data when we're renovating a duct system. Now, we're not starting from scratch. We're starting with what is there. We are making surgical repairs. And I'll give you guys 2 different approaches for this. There is a couple of barriers I need to make you all aware of, though. Starting is the biggest obstacle. Because it's like, what do I do? Where do I go? There's so many different options. You guys have so many different voices speaking to you about what's right, what's wrong. And because of that, we start to fear and we get perfectionism. How many of you guys have ever said, I'm a perfectionist? I have. It's not a blessing, it's a curse. Because what happens is, unless you think you can do it perfectly right, you never do anything. You never draw back and shoot the arrow. You just sit there and stare at the target. You can relate, can't you? I'm seeing some head nods. Guys, progress is not perfection. So when we do this, when you guys do this, I want you to think progress, not perfection. You are going to miss the target. But the more shots that you take, what's going to happen to those arrows? You're going to zero in. And then you're going to start to hit the bullseye. You're going to hit the bullseye again. And then you're going to start splitting arrows because you're hitting the same spot repeatedly. That only comes by doing. You can't think this into existence. If you ruminate on duct systems, you're like, man, I need to do this. Welcome to the world of perfection. You will do nothing with this. You are going to screw up if you do this. One of the things that we do at NCI is we help you guys learn from our screw-ups. It's a whole lot less expensive. And guys, I got 20 years of them. So needless to say, I have a lot of content. So do not let starting be your biggest obstacle. As we say, perfectionism is one of the biggest obstacles to starting. What do you guys think is another one? Some of you may be doing this. Some of you may not. What are some of your first thoughts that may be an obstacle to starting this? Because these are very real, and they will keep you from taking the first step.
Customers aren't going to want to do it.
Customers don't want to do it. That's very real. And some customers won't. That's okay. If they're happy with their crappy HVAC system, let them have it. We can't force it on them. That's an excellent point. Some customers will not want it. What else? Tools are expensive, aren't they? They're an investment. Let me share a story with you. When we started doing duct renovations, our family company was going bankrupt. We were in the red. We did not have the money to do this. My dad believed in me enough and what we were doing. It was reading articles by Rob Falke, by Dominic. He believed in what we were doing when we were gifted $5,000 instead of taking it and paying bills, which is what he should have done, and investing in the test instruments. Within 3 duct renovation jobs, those test instruments had paid for themselves, and they started to continue the profits. They are an investment. Excellent point. What else we got? Tim. Workers don't want to do the work. So, we've got a labor shortage right now. How do you convince guys to do this type of a work? We will talk about a level of entry-level worker called a duct renovator. They are your pre-installers. It gives them a chance to get familiar with the system before they're doing it. And they don't have enough knowledge yet to go, man, this sucks. So, get them while they're young. So we've got fear, expense, hard work. We've got a work ethic problem. What else? What else? If I miss you, yell at me. Time. It takes time to do this, and you need to price accordingly. You've got to price it. What's that?
Sweat, hot.
So it is. It's hot.
Sweat.
Yeah. You will sweat.
Knowledge. I create a steam bath.
Knowledge. Yes. I'm already sweating. I'm like a...
The aluminum tape won't stick because I'm creating a steam bath.
So you've got installation conditions. I mean, these are all complications. One of the things that's beautiful with duct renovations is you can schedule it during shoulder seasons. I don't know about your all's business models. Here's what ours used to do. Summer, boom. Start to go down a little bit. Fall, we start to do our maintenance contracts. And then, boom, it just plummeted. How many guys are slow right now? A lot of you are slow right now. Here's what happened when we started doing duct renovations. We would schedule them out because my guys, they didn't want to be in the sweaty attic or hot sweaty attic, suffering from that. So we scheduled it when it was more convenient. And we even offered them a price discount, which was the real price. But if they wanted it done right then, had to have it, sure, but it's this amount. We deliberately priced it to scare them off when the weather was bad because we had so many other things that we needed to do. So there's ways to handle every obstacle. You can either go around it, over it. Don't let an obstacle be a stumbling block. Let it be a stepping stone. Well, when it comes to duct renovation, there's a whole lot of factors that we need to consider. And this is one of the things that starts to kick in to providing obstacles because we've got to consider the building. We've got to consider the equipment. We've got to consider the ducts. All this stuff. We deal with all of these complex pieces that have to work together. We start overthinking. We freak out. And then I'm not going to shoot it. I'm just going to hold it. So we don't do anything. We revert back to what we know, which is swapping boxes a lot of times, unfortunately. Continuing in the rat race of low pricing. We have to consider all these factors, but there is a time and a place to consider them. That's really important to remember. It's not always on the front end. Sometimes it is after you've sold the job, and you're going to see one of my rules, I believe it's number 4 if I remember, that when it comes to these factors, there is one that is the most important. The factor. Once you take all these materials, you sandwich them, you bundle them together, you've got a building. When I went to HERS training years ago with Allison Bales, he changed a term that I used to use a lot. I used to say building envelope. Allison taught me a term, enclosure, because that's what we're doing. We're taking all this stuff, we're enclosing it. And in that enclosure, there's a couple of people here. The customer, your customer. They are the main factor. And you have to get to them before duct renovation ever comes through. So there's actually some psychology that goes into this. We're going to talk a little bit about that. How many of you guys consider yourself salespeople? Man, only a couple of hands went up. Every hand ought to go up. How many of you guys are married? You're a salesperson. You convinced a young lady or a young man to take, well, young lady to take your last name. If that's not sales, nothing is. And to spend the rest of their life with you. So, guys, it's all about persuasion. We have to help the customer understand what's in their best needs. Our job is to inform them. We inform them with data, and then they make a decision, yes or no. It's our job to provide the information. It's their job to make a decision. We got to make sure we don't get in the way. We have to make sure that we don't overcomplicate things. And that it's easier for them to understand how all these factors work together. And there are ways that we can do that. Now, there are two approaches to this. Before I went to NCI training years ago, I used to think, well, I got to rip it all out and start over. Oh, no. There are multiple approaches that you can take. The first is what we call an air upgrade. Air upgrades are really simple. It's like an entry-level duct renovation. And we're going to talk about what it focuses on, some of the features that apply into this. The other approach to duct renovation is what is called duct system optimization. And you're trying to accomplish two very different goals when you do this. So this is why you need the customer's feedback. You need their interaction. You need to know what they want, what their goals are, and then help them achieve it. Air upgrades, you'll notice the little illustrations we've got on the slide up there. There's a small blower, that's what that's supposed to be, with an arrow coming out at 100%. When we look at air upgrades, the goal is at the equipment. When we look at optimization, the goal is at the register, where the BTUs are delivered. That's what we're focusing on. An air upgrade, you guys can snap a shot of this just to keep it in context if you want. Air upgrades, the two main focuses are on static pressure and fan airflow improvements. We are trying to help the equipment breathe. Now, sometimes you may fix delivered BTU issues, delivered airflow problems, but mainly it is a prepackaged set of repairs. You pick and choose which repairs apply based on your measurements. Your measurements determine the scope of work. Isn't that interesting? Every duct renovation is customized. But what we have found with air upgrades is there is a series of duct repairs that repeat themselves, regardless of whether the ducts are in an attic, crawl space, basement, and buried. Now, I was surprised one of the obstacles that didn't get mentioned was we can't get to the ducts. Is that an obstacle? Yeah. Does that mean we shouldn't say anything? Let the customer decide. We have had customers tear their basement ceilings out because they were so uncomfortable. They're like, whatever. Others, no. Do not spend your customers' money. Let them spend it. So we make the work available, and we're focusing on the equipment. Now, here's some of the common features of an air upgrade. Here's what's crazy. Many of you are already doing this. You're just packaging it. Anytime you talk about duct renovation, don't talk about what it is, because what it is boring. What it is work. It's sweat. It's hard. The things that you guys mentioned. We focus on two areas, the equipment. And once again, our measurements will point us in the right direction. You guys will notice that a lot of these we do. However, how many of them are being guided by measurements? We have to make sure that the measurements guide us towards that filter repair, towards the duct fittings. So many times we'll look at it and we'll go, boy, that's messed up. And then we just assume it instead of measuring it and verifying it. So this is where we have data to back up what we visually verify. And you'll notice it always starts with a visual inspection. The measurements only back up what you know. How many of you guys are doing some of this stuff already? Awesome. You're there. You're there. Package it this way. Packaging is essential if you want to do this stuff. So we focus on the equipment. We have to make sure that the air gets out of it into the duct system. If you can't get the equipment right, it doesn't matter how perfect your duct system is. And there is some equipment out there, just so you guys know, that if you look at the fan capacity tables, they aren't even designed to have a duct system on them. So make sure that the equipment can deliver the air and the BTUs first. Airflow is the vehicle that the BTUs travel in. So you got to get the air first, and that's why it's the one thing that we're going to focus on. So notice that we're focusing on not only the air side, but even adjusting refrigerant. Those of you that have done duct repairs, as you've improved airflow, what have you had to do to the refrigerant? You adjust it. Usually it's pulling it out. So don't leave it. Because I don't know about you guys, when I was a young tech doing this, if the suction pressure was low, I was grabbing, I'm going back to R22 days, I was going out and grabbing the magic green jug. You guys ever do that? Start throwing the gas to the system just to try to get the pressures up, because I didn't know any better. I was trying to fix a problem, but I wasn't. Airflow will help us fix that. So you will have to readjust the refrigerant charge. And then any repairs that you do at the equipment, you make sure that you test out and verify. Isn't that interesting? Is this a different approach than what you're used to? I promise you guys, if a redneck from Kentucky can do this, you guys can do this. We also look at the duct system. Now, there is a level of change that you have to consider here, because we're going to talk about chicken and egg here in a little bit. As we start to look at some of the duct system improvements, your customers are going to guide you on this. And you have to make a decision how far you're going to go with this, because there is a very fine line that you may cross between being an air upgrade versus duct optimization. So you have to define that line. And sometimes it moves. Sometimes it's blurry. You have to define that. But you'll notice a lot of this you guys are doing anyway. Why not package it as something unique that only your company does? There's a lot of power in this, guys. It's a customized product. Nobody else can replicate this unless they're doing the exact same things that you're doing it. They're doing the exact same way that you do it. It's specialized to you. So we focus on the equipment first, duct system second. So this is if you've got that duct system that's sealed up and the customer's like, I'm not tearing my ceiling down. Cool. We'll see what we can do. And I just want to make you guys aware, sometimes the house will beat you. Sometimes it'll leave you laying in a pool of blood. And you got to do the best you can. That's if the customer wants to do something. So we've got the air upgrade approach and these features. The second is duct optimization. With the duct optimization approach, what we are doing is trying to bring an existing system up to fact. We're trying to renew it, Novare, to where it actually brings individual BTU requirements to the rooms. And sometimes this can be a little bit of work. Sometimes it can be a whole lot of work. Sometimes it's impossible. We talked earlier about perfection. One thing that you don't want to do with this, do not promise perfection. If you promise perfection to a customer, you are setting yourself up for failure. They can't afford perfection, and you can't afford to deliver it because it just takes way too long, and it's way too expensive. So be very careful what you promise. Promise a noticeable improvement and promise to document it. But we're trying to meet the BTU requirements of the room. So here's some of the features that go along with duct optimization. It gets into equipment component selection. Looking at the coil that's there. Notice that this goes farther. You're getting into actually the equipment now. Many times you will downsize the equipment. Duct fittings, we're paying special attention to it. TEL is a term up there. What's that stand for? Total equivalent length. So if you don't know what that means, sit on an Ed session this afternoon. He'll tell you all about that. Making sure that you're using smart fitting selection. Smart grill selection. If you offer balancing, make sure that there are balancing dampers in the ducts. Do not promise duct optimization if you're not putting balancing dampers in. Otherwise, because you're not going to get it. You need to balance the system. That's the verification side. But you'll notice what we're doing is looking at an ideal duct system here. And then finally, the terminal devices. Performance-grade registers and grills that actually deliver the air in the right quantities, the right throw, the right spread, to condition that room. And these all go back to ACAD Manual T principles. So we're focusing on these things to make the duct system right. Here's the challenge. The customer has to want it. So let's talk about the importance. Why duct renovation is important. If you guys had to define duct renovation's importance, why is it important? What's it determine? Comfort. What else? Delivered performance. Safety, health, efficiency. During the opening session yesterday, Jim Bergman mentioned longevity. So these are all things that cause duct renovation to be important. From the performance aspect of it, there's 4 pillars of that tie into a high-performance approach. Once again, if you sat in Chris's session with me, you saw these. A lot of times we screw these up and we get the order out of whack. Most customers will focus on safety and health first. That's where they're going to tie it down. Those are going to be their top two priorities. Our industry, we focus on efficiency, comfort, and then we're like, safety and health. Good luck. Pardon?
If you're going to die anyway.
Yeah, so let's just speed it up a little bit. So with measurements, we start to reveal some of these things. We start to hit hot button points. And one thing to be aware of, if there's no pain for a customer on their system, it's hard to create this need. Now, years ago, I was diagnosed with high blood pressure. I got a feeling it's probably that perfectionism thing. I didn't know it. I had no idea until I went to the doctor. They slapped a cuff on my arm. They were like, oh, you got blood pressure problems. Huh, I would have never known. Sometimes we have to make the pain obvious because the customer doesn't know. Once again, we make them aware of it. So think about these 4 pillars about why it's important. And when it comes to health, if you got a duct system that's pulling half its return air out of an attic or a crawl space, that could be a safety and a health issue. There's cause and effect relationships that happen with everything that we do. And they can sometimes affect the safety and the health. Some of these repairs that I mentioned, adding a large central return into the main area of the living space. Consider what may happen, the cause and effect. If you put that into an area that has a natural draft water heater in it, and now you're pulling that area into a vacuum, you may have created a situation that causes backdrafting. So for every change that you make, there is an opposite and equal reaction. Performance was mentioned. When it comes to performance, the state of the typical system is pretty rough. And these numbers are still holding true. Over 17 years, 18 years now, these numbers are still holding true based off our field testing. 57% is what the average system delivers. A code-approved system, you get a whopping 6% more. Congratulations. You put the worst system in allowed by law, you got a whopping 6%. However, if you take measurements and you start to validate your work, you can actually get up to 88%. Some of you may say, well, wait a minute, why can't I get it to 100? You can. But at some point you have to ask yourself, is the juice worth the squeeze? That's why I say, don't focus on perfectionism. It'll lead you down the wrong path. But these systems, guys, there's room for improvement here. Now, what if you hit 75%? Is that a failure? It's progress. It's not perfection. What if they started out at 35%? I would call that success. So it all depends on what your parameters are, what you have to deal with. And that's one of the reasons that we have to keep this in context. There's 4 groupings that we put when it comes to what affects this delivered performance number. And you'll notice that it's the entire system that we're looking at here in this illustration. We've got the equipment. We have its capacity. We have equipment airflow temperatures. I'm assuming everybody, unless you're like living under a rock, has bought something from Amazon in here. They have distribution. They have the factory, the warehouse, what they call fulfillment centers. Well, in an HVAC system, that fulfillment center is the equipment. It is what generates the BTUs. We also have the distribution route. That's what gets the product from the fulfillment center to our houses. The roads, that's the ducts. The ducts are what delivers the BTUs, the product of the equipment, into the conditioned space. And then finally, you have the retail outlets. Sometimes that's a store, sometimes that's you or me. That's terminal devices. That's what determines if that product is getting to where it needs to go, and then whether we receive delivery of it. Now, whether it's containing it or not, that's a building issue. But you look at all these different principles that we've got, combinations of these. They're what determines how well that system performs. And what we can do by taking the right measurements, not taking every measurement that we can, but taking the right measurements, we can pinpoint where the deficiencies are, not only in the equipment, but also in the system. The biggest variation in measurements wins. That's the one that you want to focus on. We talk about one thing. It's going to be one of our duct renovation rules we're going to talk about. Focus on one thing. This is a photo we took at a house in Lexington, Kentucky. They were pulling triple the amount of air out of this room than they were putting into it. Airflow affects comfort. What do you guys see in there? There's 2 images. Pardon? The box set of Seinfeld. They got good taste. Infiltration. It's HVAC-induced infiltration because that room is in a vacuum. This is what's happening. It starts to affect those surface temperatures. You will never see this unless you've got some specialized test instruments. I know some guys at TruTech that can hook you up. These allow us to see different things. Have any of you guys ever put in a thermal image camera? Eric Kaiser and Bill Spohn had a fantastic session the other day. You guys ever put a thermal image camera in your customer's hands? Guys, they're like a dog hunting a rabbit. They will find problems for you. They're like, come here, look at this. They will be your best salesperson, and we're going to talk about why that is so valuable here in just a minute. Now, before thermal image cameras, before we had that, we used to use something called a smoke puffer. It was a gas called titanium tetrachloride. I hear it has side effects if you huff too much of it, so that's to be determined. But once you gave that to a customer, man, they were going nuts. They were searching for air. It was neutral buoyancy smoke, and it would travel with air patterns. It was the coolest thing. They could make air visible. So with our measurements, we're making air visible. This makes the effective air movement visible. If you haven't invested in a thermal image camera, I would encourage you to. It will be one of your greatest sales tools. So to keep this simple, we've got 5 rules. And you may add to these. You may not like these rules. That's okay. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach. But you may benefit from these. And some of them you're going to go, well, that's obvious. That's just common sense. Sometimes common sense isn't common practice. So we have to consider what we're trying to do here, what we're trying to achieve. So I would encourage you to write these rules down. Create your own. See how much you can come up with. Number 1. This kind of sounds like the most obvious one, doesn't it? Don't fix the ducts on a piece of equipment that's grossly oversized. If you want to own a nightmare, you fix the equipment on grossly oversized, you fix the ducts on grossly oversized equipment. Depending on where the ducts are located, up to 40% of a building's load can be through the ductwork. Well, guess what happens when you renovate a duct system? You reduce those loads. And the oversized equipment that didn't look like it was very bad to begin with, now barely runs. They're cold, they're clammy, or they're getting scorching hot and then freezing in the wintertime. Because guess what? You fixed their duct system. Congratulations. You just owned a problem. So you have to be very careful with this. There are puzzle pieces that have to be used. If you just go in and say, oh man, and you focus on the ducts and you're not focusing on the size of the equipment, you're going to manufacture problems that will haunt you for a long time, especially if people spent a lot of money with you to fix this. So this is where you'll see rule number 5 here in just a second. It ties in with this rule. This is common sense, right? Some of this stuff we know. If the equipment's oversized, you need to get the BTU factory right first. If the roads are too small going to it, you got to fix the equipment first. Rule number 2, everything hinges on this. Involve the customer. Make them or what you want to do is make them a detective in their own home. You serve as the guide. Is that an interesting way to look at this? And you do that by getting them engaged. I promise you, if you can get the customer measuring, now some places you don't want them measuring. Don't say, hey, come up here in this attic and let's go across 20 feet back to the air handler and let's measure static pressure. That's probably not a good idea. Because the customer, if they end up through their ceiling on the floor, probably not a good day to be you. So be smart. This is one of the things that Bluetooth makes handy. They can see the measurements while you're doing them. If you can involve them, one of the most powerful sales techniques that we ever used was putting a balancing hood in a customer's hand and letting them measure airflow. If they had a target to aim for, we showed earlier the illustration of the target and the arrows. If you have a target to aim for, if they have a simple target to aim for, and that measurement is way off, they're going to go, well, what's going on? We should have this. Why don't we have that? And then they start to ask questions. Here's the other thing that you do. You immediately put doubt in their mind for any competitors that have either come before or after you that are not doing the exact same thing. You engage them. Before I started doing this, when I was a technician, there was one thing I wanted the homeowner to do while I was there. What do you think it was? Go away. A lot of times they want to look over your shoulder. They want to see what you're doing. You guys ever experienced that? You're like, leave, please. We're in their home. Nobody knows their system better than they do. I started to cherish those people. They're telling me what they want. It was my job to figure out how to get it to them. and if it was possible. Involve your customer. I was kind of torn because I wanted to put this as rule number 1, because if you don't do this, if they're like, we're at work, go ahead and do what you got to do. If you can't get them physically and emotionally involved, your chances of success drop drastically. So I was torn between making this rule 1 or rule 2. So I felt rule 1 needed to be addressed first, though. So rule 2. Rule 3. Some people may not agree with this. That's cool. But I will tell you from a lot of years of doing this, if you start focusing on every single variable that needs to be addressed, when you've got a customer involved, you are going to fail. Information overload. This is a quote from the book Influence. I don't know if you guys are readers or listen to audiobooks. This is one that needs to be in everybody's library that is in HVAC. Now, if you read it, I mean, it's a pretty thick book. And it's about as interesting as watching paint dry. But there is a lot of fantastic information on 5 ways that we are influenced. And what's crazy is when you see how you've been influenced. So sometimes we use these tactics. Sometimes we have these tactics used on us. There's a quote in this book. I'll let you read it. I'm not going to read it for verbiage. But what it focuses on is when you're on a sales call, when you're talking to a customer, there's so many things that are going on, so many interactions. You have to pick one thing to focus on so that they can remember it. If you start puking out, the building, infiltration, heat loss, heat gain, you start mentioning stuff like enthalpy, equipment capacity, you're oversized, you start throwing all this stuff out, they freak out. Any of you guys ever go to the circus when you were kids? Ringling Brothers, Barnum Bailey Circus used to come through the central Kentucky area, and there was always a lion tamer, had a chair in his hand, and he would put it in the face of a lion. And the lion would just sit there, and of course he'd crack the whip and all that. The lion would just sit there. Why? I always ask why. Why did the lion, such a vicious animal, why did it just sit there and let that guy crack the whip at it and hold the chair in its face? Do you guys know the answer? I was fascinated when I found out why. Paralysis by analysis. That cat was trying to focus on all 4 legs of that chair at the same time, and it couldn't. Where it was trying to focus on everything all at once, it froze. It didn't do anything. And guys, if we're doing that with customers on a sales call, if we're trying to help them understand the importance of duct renovation, and we're focusing on all these different things, they freeze up. And they go with the one thing that they do understand, price. And if yours isn't the lowest, they're not going with you. So in duct renovation, it is very important to focus on one thing. And I got to tell you, air is the easiest. Sometimes static pressure is easiest, depending on what you're doing and who's there. Sometimes static pressure is the gateway to get into airflow. But you got to focus on one thing. Otherwise, your customers cannot absorb it. Now, that lion, if the lion tamer dropped the chair, guess what his name is? Lunch. Thank you. Lunch. I'm here all day. It's lunch. So, guys, this quote, there's so much that our minds can handle. And that customer, they are already in a stressful situation. They can only absorb so much. Focus on one thing. And by them interacting, guess what you're doing? You're making it an experience that they'll never forget. I still have customers that, you run into them out in the grocery store or whatever. And they'll talk to them. They're like, that was so fun. We made it a game. They're stressed out. Take some of the pressure off of them. So rule number 3, focus on one thing. Number 4, get paid for your designs. Does this seem like common sense? Design takes time. Doesn't it? Here's where we get into some of the chicken or egg. In order to have some of those targets, you need the design first. But what happens if you go through all the effort, you put all this design in, and you tell the customer, this is what we need. Sorry, we're going to go with Chuck in a truck. He's $1,000 cheaper. Oh, but Bubba and Skeeter, they were within $500. You do all this work for free. So I'm going to tell you, this is a bold stance. Don't do it for free. Get paid for your designs. There is too much of your knowledge and time that goes into this to be giving it away for free. So we talked about focusing on one thing. Sometimes you've got to get some basic necessary information first. Sell the job first. Then get paid for your designs. At that point in time, it's worth you to invest in it. Now, does that mean that proper design should be skipped? Absolutely not. That's not what I'm saying. If that's what you heard, you weren't paying attention. you get paid at the right point in time. And this is where we get into the chicken or egg. So I'll share with you guys some of the little techniques that we used to use and that we teach at NCI. So number 4, get paid. There's a lot of time and effort that goes into this. These books are not cheap. They're an investment in your education. There's a lot of great principles that are in them that will aid you as you go out. Make sure you're getting paid to do the work. And then finally, use all the puzzle pieces. I'm assuming there's a lot of dads in here. Some of you guys may be dads like me. When we put together Christmas gifts for our kids, there were always screws left over. That ever happened to you guys? Have you ever had a kid in the swing and they go swinging and they keep going? Or am I the only dad that had that happen? That's because we skip parts. There's instructions. There's reasons that we follow directions. When you are looking at all these puzzle pieces, they can be intimidating. This is where you need to process. But it is a combination of proper design. That's our requirements. That's what we're aiming for. Actual measurements and communication. Use all the puzzle pieces. Don't leave out parts. Otherwise, there is a gap, a void. And sometimes it is huge. Other times it's very small. And sometimes the smallest thing may be the most important. So pay very close attention. Guys, I hope you enjoyed the 5 rules. They have served me well as we start to put this together. We've also got questions to consider because this is going to determine the approach that you take. Depending on how you answer these questions is going to depend on what you do first. So many times we look at duct renovation from one angle. We have to approach it this way. There's actually multiple angles of attack that you can take. So why are you there? Did the customer call and say, we're uncomfortable? We have had nonstop problems. Is it your customer? Here's another obstacle. How do you handle it when you go out and you test your own duct system and it's the problem? How do you handle that? You better be ready for it because it's coming if you do this. That is usually the first obstacle. I think I spit on you, I'm sorry. That is usually the first obstacle that most people cannot overcome because their natural response is to try to do the right thing. And they're like, man, we're going to have to go out and fix all these duct systems for free? Did any of you think that? Please be honest with me. Did any of you think of it, man, if I find this stuff, I'm going to have to fix it for free? Absolutely not. That customer paid for your knowledge at that point in time. You're always improving. My dad had pancreatic cancer not too long ago. They made 2 small incisions to remove it. Now, 10 years previous to that, it would have been a major surgery. Now, if my dad had had that done 10 years previously, does that mean that he sues the doctors because they cut him wide open instead of using the 2 small surgical incisions? Would he have a valid point if he did that? No, because technology has changed. Techniques have changed. And guys, as you learn, you get better. You learn, you do. When you put a system in, even though there may be problems, you did the best you could at that point in time. Now you're learning new things, new skills, new test instruments that weren't available, and you start to apply them. So don't offer to fix this stuff for free. This is not Pandora's box. It's one of the biggest fears. That's one of the things that we had. However, I will tell you, if you're not prepared for how to handle that, you're in trouble. So to make that easier, my contact information, I believe, is available. If not, get with me after the class. What we have at NCI are what are called planned response statements. And I'd like to offer those to you guys if you'll email me for them. And I won't spam you or do anything like that. I just want you to have the information. Because it's a resource that I wish I'd had when I started to do this. But they are planned response statements. If you run into this situation, here is a suggestion for how you handle it. And everyone's a little bit different. You'll know by how the customer reacts. Number 2, what are you trying to accomplish? Does that customer want the perfect duct system, or do they just want the equipment to quit breaking? What are their goals? And you got to ask questions to get to the root of that. If a customer is talking, you need to be writing. Number 1, it's courteous. Number 2, you'll never remember everything. If they tell you an important point that they want fixed, you need to write it down. If you don't write it down, it didn't happen. Figure out what you're trying to accomplish. And I will tell you that as part of the communication piece, that's really important. because there were things that we sold a job based off of for duct renovation, and it was a minute detail. But to the customer, guess what? It was the hinge point that sold the job. And we blew it because I didn't write it down. Our sales guys didn't write it down. Oops. And then the customer calls, and they're like not happy. We just spent all this money. This is one of the things that we wanted addressed. That hurts. So write it down, even the most minute detail. Find out what the customer wants to solve. You have to put the ball in their court. As you involve them, as they become a detective in their own home, as they start to discover these problems, they will tell you what they want. We had one young lady, she did a lot of cooking. She said, I want to register underneath the stove where I cook. I want a damper in it, and when I'm cooking in the summertime, I want to be able to open it. When it's in the wintertime, I want to be able to shut it. Simple request, right? Do you know how many guys would have overthought that? Well, you don't need that much heating and cooling in the garage. It's going to mess up the rest of the house. She told us what she wanted. So guess what we did? We gave it to her. We put her in control of her air, and we trusted her with it. What a novel idea. We didn't assume our customers were idiots. You have to know what their pain is. They'll tell you. Sometimes it's indirectly. Sometimes it's not. So you have to look for the clues. What are some clues that you guys typically look for that a customer has pain? There's some comfort clues. Fans. Fans are really common. What else? Taped off ducts. Excellent. Space heaters. Window units. That's like sticks out like a sore thumb. You got a window shaker. What else? Closed doors. We don't want to heat that part of the house. What about smart vents? Oh yeah, I can turn the air on and off in this room. What else? Anything else? What about scoops on registers? Huge. Yeah. These are all visual clues. We know this stuff. Capitalize on it. Ask that customer, how come you have that door shut? We talked about number 4 earlier, your access. Can you get to the ducts? That's going to determine what you promise. And that's going to determine how far you can go with this. How many of you are in here from areas that have basements where the ducts are in soffits? Okay, you're going to be limited by some of the things that you can do unless that customer's pain is so great that they're like, let's rip the drywall out. And some do it. It's not the majority, but some do it. So you're going to have to get creative. And there's ways to do that. Your imagination is going to be the limitation. You got to figure out how much access you have. It's going to be limited. We can design perfection on paper, but we're always going to be limited by free area. There's only so much that we can do. How much access? And sometimes there's going to be bigger guys like me. I don't fit through small holes. So you have to account for how much room that you actually have. And then finally, how many people need to touch the renovation? So let me clarify touch here. How many companies do I have in here that are maybe 5 people or less? Okay, so quite a few of you. How many are 10 or more? Okay, depending on the size of your company and how many people are involved in this, your level of detail may have to go granular. You may have to have a lot of details. If you're 5 people or less, you're going to be more engaged, more directly involved. You can leave out some steps. If you have a technician, if you have a salesperson, if you have an installer, warehouse, someone who's a verifier, you've got 5 people involved, if I counted right, that need to touch that renovation. They need to know how the baton is being passed to them and what their role and their responsibility is. Notice that one of the big puzzle pieces was communication. How many people need to touch this? How many people need to be involved? This is where most renovations go south, is when you make the transition. Do I have any salespeople in here? And I'm not talking about because you've convinced somebody to marry you. Actual salespeople in here. Okay, so I got some salespeople. I'm not trying to beat you guys up, but typically where most problems happen is from the salesperson to installer handoff. Those of you that have done this work, would you agree with me or not? 100%. Let's all beat up on the sales guys. No, I'm just kidding. So, but seriously, that you have to have systems and processes in place that account for that. Otherwise, you're going to go off the rails on this, and you need to account for that. Make sure you know how many people need to touch it, what their roles are, and what they're going to be doing. They need to know what they're doing. Has that been communicated? So, guys, there's stuff that does that for you. I will tell you, photos, videos, priceless. Priceless. As I said earlier, your approach may vary. And guess what? Cool. That's okay. Just because we make soup a little bit differently, it doesn't mean it's wrong. Sometimes the outcomes will be the exact same, as long as all the ingredients are the same, or puzzle pieces, whatever analogy we're using. If your approach varies and you're having success with it, don't change it. Fair enough? I'm presenting options that you can look at. There's so many guys that want to go, you're wrong, I'm right. Whatever. You guys use the approach that works for you. I'm simply giving you a choice to consider. Now, let's get down into the nitty-gritty for our time remaining. We got 7 steps for this. And you'll notice that some of these steps, they change. That's why when you look at duct renovations, they're chicken or egg. What comes first? Chicken or the egg? Well, it depends. And you're going to find that some of these steps are interchangeable depending on why you're there. Those 5 questions that we just looked at. Depending on how that's answered is going to depend on whether you're the chicken or the egg. So sometimes you get cracked, sometimes you don't. So 7 steps. These are abbreviated. You may want to snap a picture of this because we're going to go into each one individually. But this is the overview of it, of how it starts. Number 1 is based off of a technician's viewpoint. In many situations, duct renovations are generated from the technician. They are the one that gathers the lead. If you're a technician and you're not measuring static pressure and calculating airflow on every call, renovation has died before you ever left the job. You guys are the hinge point when it comes to most renovation. How many technicians do I have in here? Got a lot of you. I was one too, I know. I'm a reform technician now. You guys have tools, I have a clicker. Start with the equipment, look at it. Most problems we can tell with our eyes. We can hear it sometimes. You guys ever hear that blower that's operating against restrictive ducts? You can hear it? Sometimes we can smell it, right? You can smell things sometimes. I would never encourage you to taste an HVAC system. I hear it's not fun. But most of our natural senses we can use to get a gauge on what the equipment is. Once we have an idea, we've done that overview, then we start to measure. We identify duct deficiencies. We'll walk through how to do that. Once we've done that, then we diagnose. We figure out what's going on. We use industry standards, manufacturers' data as our target, where we're shooting those arrows at. That's our target. Then we need to conduct an interview. Now notice, I've got a note at the bottom there, step 4 versus step 1. This is one of those chicken or egg things. Why are you there? If you're a salesperson, if you're a comfort advisor, and you go in, the technician has already generated the lead, well, you may go back. It depends on why you're there and what steps have already been accomplished. So it depends. After that interview, you're going to conduct a scope of work. Now here's what's interesting. Scope of work for the customer and your team. Why does the customer's scope of work come first? I'm sorry, I heard a bunch of different things. More supportive expectations. Guys, it's their idea. They're telling you what they want. So you have to write the scope of work for them. We'll talk about how to do that. I'll give you a hint, don't go into detail. But you also need a scope of work for your team. Depending on how many hands touch that, it's going to depend on the details that you give. Finally, you're going to do the duct renovation work, and then you test out. Any work that you do, you need measurements before, measurements after to compare against. You also need tools. Now, for those of you that have been to NCI classes before, you know that we talk about plotting fan airflow. Guys, that's a service tech's tool. Once you're getting into renovation, you need a higher level of accuracy. There's guys right on the other side of this booth that offer a tool that measures airflow directly. We were in their labs back in August, and I was blown away at the accuracy of this device. They passed the NCI torture test with flying colors, and we're like, we're sold. It's a direct measurement, and it is a salesman's secret weapon. Don't make them do the math. Let Let the app do it. Let the workflow do it. You need a manometer. The more money you spend for a manometer, the more accurate it's going to be. Depending on the cost of your manometer, it may just be a random number generator. Make sure that you get what you pay for. We all know that. So you need a way to measure airflow, 1 at the equipment, 2 at the system. You need to know what's coming out of the registers. Depending on how far you go with this, you may not even get to that step. That depends on what the customer wants to do. Many people think duct renovation, you have to measure everything. Depends on what the customer wants. That's why they're number 2. Involve them. Find out what they want. Because that's going to depend on the path that you take, whether you take the air upgrade approach or whether you take the duct optimization approach. You also need temperature, velocity measurements. There's a bunch of different test instruments that you need to do this. So the barrier for entry, you mentioned earlier, it's expensive. It does take an investment to do this. That's why not everyone will do it. Good news for you, which means competition's low. Let's talk about number 1, visual inspection. Some of these are pretty common. Look at the equipment. What are some of the things that you guys commonly look for as soon as you open the equipment up? Maybe even before. Cleanliness. I heard rust. What else? Water spots. There's all kinds of visual things that we're looking for. Are the ducts connected? So actually that would fall into duct system. So then we can also, just by looking at the ducts, looking for kink points. We're doing a visual inspection of all the different aspects. My buddy Vince DeFilippo calls this walking the ship. He just walks and he looks around, he takes notes. If he sees something of interest, he's pulling out his phone, snapping a shot to pass along to his guys. Why would we have building down there? Why would that be an important factor when we're doing a duct renovation? Because we're looking at the ducts, right? Yeah. The building is what contains the air. It's what contains, or hopefully contains the BTUs. It's the part of the duct system that makes the connection from the air from the supply registers back to the return. If you don't account for it, you're missing a massive part of the HVAC system. Because you could have the perfect duct system. If the building's screwed up, forget it. You're still going to have problems. So all of these are things that we want to encounter in visual inspections. And we could have an entire class on visual inspections. Make sure you're looking for the right things. Number 2, we're going to measure the system. Last year we talked about vital signs. There's 4 of them. Your medical professional, your doctor, specialist, whoever it is, they take baseline measurements. And they don't do it just once, they do it every time. Some of them, they only do once. But if it's a statistic that can change, they're going to measure it, and they're going to document it. And I would encourage you to do the same, because this is what you're aiming for, these 4 vital signs. They all have HVAC system equivalents. This is where we get into total external. Total external, in my opinion, or external, depending on what source you look at, is the first. That tells you an HVAC system may be restrictive, may not. Start with total external. Joey Henderson gave a fantastic presentation yesterday on airflow diagnostics. He talked about the importance of external static pressure. When you look at it, it'll give you clues that there are airside restrictions. Start with it. Now, total external will tell you that there's a problem, will not tell you where. This is where you need additional measurements. You need to measure the component pressure drops. You're looking in particular at the coil, at the filter. Sometimes the coil's internal. So any equipment replacements that you guys do, if they're air handlers or package units, make sure that you measure and record the coil pressure drop on that piece of equipment on startup. Otherwise, it's going to be nearly impossible to find the engineering data on it, unless it's actually manufactured as a separate coil. We've also got filter pressure drop. The highest area of resistance, this is really important, you guys want to write this down. The highest area of resistance, and I mean your measurement compared to where it ought to be, the farther the spread between there, that is where you're going to start to focus on your duct renovations. So what the measurements do is they guide you in the right direction instead of keeping you wandering out in the woods. They point you in the right direction. So we've got components in the equipment. We also have duct pressures. Now, one of the things that we used to do when we were taking that big leap in missing testing, prescribing, and diagnosis is we would pull out a duct calculator. We'd slide it to, what rate are you guys using? Because we were just randomly picking stuff half the time. If we were feeling generous, we'd go 0.08 or 0.06. So most guys will go 0.10. So we'd slide it and go, yeah, this duct, it's doing this much airflow. Ready to go. All right? Now, unfortunately, we were missing some stuff. you can take a pressure reading in the return duct and in the supply duct where the air enters the equipment, and you can tell in less than 2 minutes if you've got duct restrictions. Now, you'll probably find that first visually. You'll see that. Measurements back it up. Next, you're going to measure fan airflow. Chris Hughes, sliding in the TrueFlow, getting a direct airflow measurement. We compare that to design. Now, some of you may stop at static pressure and fan airflow. That may be all you need. That customer say, let's just get the equipment going. Let's fix the factory first. I'm not worried about the distribution route. That may be where it stops. Remember, make it their idea. However, they may decide to go farther, measuring system airflow. I will tell you, if you're a technician and you let a customer do this on a problem room, you've probably sold it at that point in time, once you get them involved. So, Mike Barnes, how many of you guys know Mike? I knew I'd call his name wrong. Mike's measuring airflow at a central return. Once again, we're getting a direct measurement. So if you got a central return, it's nice and easy. You can get return airflow. On the supply side, it gets a little bit more challenging. Because as we look at this floor plan, there's supply registers in every room. Do not go in and start measuring every single room unless you're getting paid to do it. This is what's called an airflow diagnostic, and it is generated from a technician-based lead. This is a service that you get paid to do. I will tell you, when I was in the field doing this, one system was $495, $295 for the extra one. I would encourage you not to use my pricing because that's antiquated. Your pricing has to be based on what you need. Inside that airflow diagnostic pricing, we were also doing our designs. We were getting paid for it. And guess what we offered the customer as a carrot just to get them persuaded a little bit more to take the work? We will refund this price if you decide to go with us. Now they've got skin in the game. If they didn't, they got a report, and we were done with them. That means that was a customer that we probably didn't want in the first place. So you see where I'm getting at? Chicken or egg. So you got to take measurements. If you're doing a full-blown air diagnostic, you're going to measure every single room and see what's going on. Next, you diagnose your readings. And what we do with diagnosis is we take our measurements, we take our entering measurements, and we compare them to what our design is. As I said, if it's above range drastically, that tells us there's a problem. For instance, if you guys went in on a piece of equipment that had a total external measured of 0.9 and the fan could only move the right amount of airflow at 0.5, would that be a problem? Yeah, that's a problem. That's an indicator. We got issues. We need to dig deeper. So now what we do, we go a little bit farther. We take those measurements across the filter and the coil and the ducts, and then we see where that resistance is. Which one is the most restrictive to airflow? Because that's going to focus where we put our attention for the renovation, whether it's an air upgrade or whether it's duct optimization. So if you had a filter that was 170% of its rating, is that a good thing or a bad thing? Pretty bad. And some components are worse than others. Sometimes it may just be undersized. This is where the visual inspection comes in. Is it a bad filter or is it an undersized filter? It depends. So your visual inspection, your knowledge will tie in with this. We also have to get into duct pressures, measuring the supply duct. We have budgets for that. If you guys are interested in the NCI pressure budgets for different fan ratings, email me. I'll send them to you. It's a great diagnostic tool. Now, does that mean it's a line that's drawn in the sand? Absolutely not. It's to guide you in the right direction. With any duct renovation, the challenge is always to quit running in circles and to make progress. Remember, we're not worried about perfection. We're trying to make progress. So we look at both the supply pressure and the duct pressures. Keep this one in your memory. We're at 200% of where we should be. Supply duct, return duct. Which one's more of a problem? Return in this example. Now, does that mean the supply is okay? No. What happens if you fix the return duct in this example and don't touch the supply? You still have a problem. The supply will go up, depending on fan type. So it depends. But you have to account for this. Once again, we're making our measurement. The data is transparent. We're measuring fan airflow. We're only at 70% of what we need. Add a static pressure of 0.9. Well, we got to dig a little bit farther. You see what I'm getting at? As we start to move through this, guys, the measurements will tell us where the problem's at. So if we're taking that leap and we're skipping testing, diagnostics, and prescription, we may create more problems than we've ever done. So notice these steps. They build on each other sequentially. Finally, system airflow. You need designs. Now, typically, you're going to get this through doing your calculations, but there's going to be times when you walk in and a customer's like, how much airflow do we need? And if you go, I don't know, I need to do my designs. Wrong answer. Give them a number, but let them know it's an estimation. Walk them through the process. If you guys want a process for how to estimate room airflow, once again, send me an email. I'll walk you through it. I'll give you the report and the steps to do it. You can let the customer determine airflow for their room. Here's where we need. Here's what we need. Let's see what we've got. Don't guess. There's multiple ways that you can handle this. Sometimes we would actually use our own competition's lack of knowledge of airflow against them. How many of your competitors think a 6-inch duct delivers 100 CFM always? I know all of them do because I used to. 100 CFM, yep, always. Well, let's see what we've got. And then we put a good quality capture hood up there and see what we've got. We measure and compare design to required. The farther the distance, the greater the chances of that room being uncomfortable. How do you know which room to start with? One simple word. Ask. Ask. If there's one room in your house that you could have a thermostat, where would it be? Oh, it's this one. And we start to figure out. You'll notice as you're going through this, if you've got the customer involved, they're going to develop the scope of work for you. And that's why you can have confidence in it. It's not your idea. It's theirs. They'll take ownership of it. And guess what they're going to do to help you? They want to make sure that you get the results. This is where the interview comes in. We talked about one big puzzle piece being communication. When we communicate, get that customer's feedback because now you got a fork in the road. You got to decide, are we going to go and work on the equipment side of it with an air upgrade approach, or are we going to go deeper? Are we going to start to get in? Are we going to have additional testing that needs to be done? You notice when you go in for a physical, there's only so much testing that they do. If they find a problem with those baseline measurements, what do they recommend? More testing. You go to a specialist. So at this point in time where there's a fork in the road, you have to make a decision to whether you're going to cross the line from being a generalist to a specialist. And that customer's choice makes that decision for you. There is an additional fee that's charged for that. You will have to determine what that is. Ask that customer, what do you want to do? How do we handle this? And let them decide once they have the data. From that, you'll create a scope of work. So from that scope of work, from your measurements, you're going to see where the problem's at. You're going to start to prescribe a scope of work. And guess who's going to help you do this? Your customer. Your customer helps you with this. It's their idea. How fun is that? They're deciding what happens with their system. Now, granted, it depends on how far you've gone to what decisions can be made. With this scope of work, they're going to say, well, we'd like to do this. And you're going to say, well, we can't really do that because we need more information. So sometimes they may not have bought an airflow diagnostic. It may be this step that pushes them over the edge. Once they find out, well, we don't have enough information because we test, we don't guess. So here's some of the parts. I just blew up every part of this form so you guys could take a look at it. We're decreasing static on the return side. There's multiple ways that you can do this in this form. Let them decide based on what we've seen, the photos we've taken, the measurements that we have. What do you think? So we start to go through and we combine our visual inspection, our measurements to determine that scope of work. We look at it on the return side, the supply side, duct leakage. We also get into insulation, access. All these are pieces on this form. System cleaning. Remember renovation to make new. One of the things that will screw your readings up the most is a dirty blower. That's why you need a true flow if you're doing duct renovations. System cleaning and additional work. And you guys may take this form and do whatever you want with it. It's there as a tool to assist you guys, to aid you in what you're doing. But any work that you do, make sure that you're doing the verification piece of the puzzle. And you'll determine how far that verification is. It will determine what you've done. If you touch it, verify it. If you didn't touch it, Well, make that decision yourself. So these are some of the things. And then, of course, any comments? Remember, communication is one of those big, big puzzle pieces. And if you're doing duct renovations, this will be the most important tool of all. A tape measure. Has anybody in here ever had to install a piece of equipment that wouldn't fit through the opening? Yeah. So you guys understand, the most important tool, measurements. Make sure you got a tape measure. 5, we're going to communicate the scope of work. I love this quote by George Bernard Shaw. The single biggest problem in communication, we assume it took place. Yeah. Isn't that interesting? We've all suffered from this, guys. We make assumptions. So this is where when we get into a scope of work, keep it simple for the customer. Focus on their pain points. Talk about how you're going to fix it. Make it simple and easy for them to understand. Depending on which member of your team you need to install. I just picked installers out. They need to know what's changing. They need the data. They need to know what they're changing. Don't just say, go fix this. I have had guys, they'll get all jacked up on Mountain Dew when they go out to do the testing. They're like, we sold this. Go do it. And the poor install crew shows up, or the duct renovators, and they're like, what do we do? Curse of knowledge. We have to communicate. 6, you're going to do the duct renovation. Guys, this one's pretty self-explanatory. Do the work. This is the hard part. I dedicated one slide to the hardest part of the entire thing. You do the work. This is where the installation, your craftsmanship, this is where it shines. And then you test out. You let that customer know. They get an assurance report. You know, sometimes we have insurance reports. This is an assurance report, an assurance policy that that customer got what they paid for. Every measurement that was taken going in is taken going out. You verify the design worked. This is scary. I will tell you, because when we have gone in and done test outs, we have found things that needed to be tweaked. And then you have the oh crap moment. Oh crap, we missed that. Oh crap, that got overlooked. Oh crap, that got put in wrong. Those are rough. So we go back and we make our adjustments. Finally, let's talk about what we've discussed, guys. We did a review. We talked about what duct renovation is, the importance of it. We talked about 5 rules. We went over the 7 steps after you consider those 5 questions. Isn't that interesting? Has this been a different approach that you guys may never considered before? I've tried to figure out how I could pack enough in to give you the confidence to go start with this without, in 80 minutes you can only do so much. So now let's do our next steps. Here's where I transition this to you guys. Once you go out there, start with what you have. Don't let perfectionism kick in. Don't think, I got to go out and buy 10 grand worth of test equipment. If you've got a manometer, you can start. How many of you in here own a manometer? You have no excuse not to start. Excuses only satisfy the people that make them. Thank you, Dad. So you look at some of these steps. Guys, these are the things that you can go do. If you haven't snapped a photo of this, I would encourage you to. Capture these steps. Get the test instruments that you need. Start on your own stuff. Test your own stuff. There's things that you may be doing that you're not even aware of. We thought we did great work. It just looked pretty. It still sucked. We had to fix it. And then you start teaching others. When you teach others, that's when you learn the best. Once you have mastered things in your own home and you've got your system set, then you start offering the services to others and you become an airhead. How many of you guys are airheads in here? Hoorah! Guys, I'll tell you about NCI. We are a training company. We are a culture change company. One of the things that we do is we stop talking because we're out of time. Guys, keep it simple. Thank you.
Big thanks to David. Big thanks to NCI. Please go check those guys out. And as always, if you want to attend the symposium, go to hvacrschool.com, go up to the top events, find the symposium, and check it out right there.
Thanks for watching our video. If you enjoyed it and got something out of it, if you wouldn't mind hitting the thumbs up button to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and click the notifications bell to be notified when new videos come out. HVAC School is far more than a YouTube channel. You can find out more by going to hvacrschool.com, which is our website and hub for all of our content, including tech tips, videos, podcasts, and so much more. You can also subscribe to the podcast on any podcast app of your choosing. You can also join our Facebook group if you want to weigh in on the conversation yourself. Thanks again for watching.